I really can't believe I've been coming here for 14 years. You're sure that's accurate, huh? 2004?
Give or take a couple of years. You came for the homeschooling seminar when you're still wearing saffron.
Really? Yeah. Okay, so it's at least before 2007. Yeah, so it's so nice to see all of you, and it's so amazing that no one has changed in 14 years. Everyone's exactly the same. Neelamani Prabhu certainly looks the same. Madan Gopal still looks like a Gopala. And yeah, no one has changed. I don't think anyone's changed. But Kushekar has changed. He didn't used to be there at that time. New body. So thank you all again for having me for yet another year. I really enjoy my visit here. Coming here regularly means that it's more than just a seminar. So many friendships are here, and so many friendships to remember and build and cultivate. So it's very meaningful to speak to a group of devotees who are not just audience members, but actual friends. So thank you so much for coming. I don't know Spanish. This is Spanish Bhagavatam. Maybe it's Portuguese. I don't know. Telle, quelle est?
French.
French? Oh, okay. So I don't know French. I wanted to begin with a verse from Bhagavad Gita for today's seminar. And to start things off, there's a wonderful verse in chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita, where pretty much every verse is famous in that chapter, but this verse in particular I think is relevant for our topic, and it's verse number 30 from chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna talks about how we ought to relate to a devotee who may have committed a mistake. Okay? So, Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadapi Swapadantikam. Please repeat. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 If you know this verse, you can repeat after me. I'll just do it once through. Api chet suduracharo.
Api chet suduracharo.
Bhajate mam ananyabhak.
Bhajate mam ananyabhak.
Sadhureva samantavya.
Sadhureva samantavya.
Samyagya vasito hisa.
Samyagya vasito hisa.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. Please repeat. Even if one commits the most abominable action.
Even if one commits the most abominable action.
If he is engaged in devotional service.
If he is engaged in devotional service.
He is to be considered saintly.
He is to be considered saintly.
Because he is properly situated in his determination.
Because he is properly situated in his determination.
So Srila Prabhupada's purport is a couple pages long, but it's really powerful. He's making a very strong point here in the purport. So please listen carefully. The word sudurachara used in this verse is very significant, and we should understand it properly. When a living entity is conditioned, he has two kinds of activities. One is conditional, and the other is constitutional. As for protecting the body or abiding by the rules of society and state, certainly there are different activities, even for the devotees, in connection with the conditional life. And such activities are called conditional. Besides these, the living entity who is fully conscious of his spiritual nature and is engaged in Krishna consciousness, or the devotional service of the Lord, has activities which are called transcendental. Such activities are performed in his constitutional position, and they are technically called devotional service. Now, in the conditioned state, sometimes devotional service and the conditional service in relation to the body will parallel one another. But then again, sometimes these activities become opposed to one another. As far as possible, a devotee is very cautious so that he does not do anything that could disrupt his wholesome condition. He knows that perfection in his activities depends on his progressive realization of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes, however, it may be seen that a person in Krishna consciousness commits some act which may be taken as most abominable, socially or politically. But such a temporary fall down does not disqualify him. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated that if a person falls down, but is wholeheartedly engaged in the transcendental service of the Supreme Lord, the Lord, being situated within his heart, purifies him and excuses him from that abomination. The material contamination is so strong that even a yogi fully engaged in the service of the Lord sometimes becomes ensnared. But Krishna consciousness is so strong that such an occasional fall down is at once rectified. Therefore, the process of devotional service is always a success. No one should deride a devotee for some accidental fall down from the ideal path, for, as explained in the next verse, such occasional fall downs will be stopped in due course, as soon as a devotee is completely situated in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, a person who is situated in Krishna consciousness and is engaged with determination in the process of chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, should be considered to be in the transcendental position, even if by chance or accident he is found to have fallen. The words sadhur eva, he is saintly, are very emphatic. They are a warning to the non-devotees that because of an accidental fall down, a devotee should not be derided. He should still be considered saintly, even if he has accidentally fallen down. And the word mantavya is still more emphatic. If one does not follow this rule and derides a devotee for his accidental fall down, then one is disobeying the order of the Supreme Lord. The only qualification of a devotee is to be unflinchingly and exclusively engaged in devotional service. In the Nrsimha Purana, the following statement is given: Bhagavati chahara vananya cheta vrishamadinopi virajate manushyaha nahi shashakalushat chavi kadachit timira para bhavatam upaiti chandraha. The meaning is that even if one is fully engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, even if one fully engaged in the devotional service of the Lord is sometimes found engaged in abominable activities, these activities should be considered to be like the spots that resemble the mark of a rabbit on the moon. Such spots do not become an impediment to the diffusion of moonlight. Similarly, the accidental fall down of a devotee from the path of saintly character does not make him abominable. On the other hand, one should not misunderstand that a devotee in transcendental devotional service can act in all kinds of abominable ways. This verse only refers to an accident due to the strong power of material connections. Devotional service is more or less a declaration of war against the illusory energy. As long as one is not strong enough to fight the illusory energy, there may be accidental fall downs. But when one is strong enough, he is no longer subjected to such fall downs, as previously explained. No one should take advantage of this verse and commit nonsense and think that he is still a devotee. If he does not improve in his character by devotional service, then it is to be understood that he is not a high devotee. So, basically, the structure for the 3 days is as follows. The title of the seminar, as Prabhu mentioned, is Seeking Forgiveness and Giving Forgiveness, Lessons from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And what we'll do is, today we will focus on Krishna's quality of forgiveness, to think of it as a model for how we can act and how we ought to give our forgiveness. Okay, so we think of it in terms of Krishna tonight in the short time that we have. And then tomorrow we focus on the act of seeking forgiveness, of taking forgiveness, or asking for forgiveness from others we have wronged. And then on Sunday, we will focus on giving forgiveness. And in each case, we'll discuss the methods, the practical methods of how we undergo the theoretical reasons as to why we should. We'll discuss the practical reasons, ways in which we can do that. And finally, we'll discuss the key obstructions, the key challenges or problems that prevent us from engaging in asking for forgiveness or in giving forgiveness to someone who might have wronged us. Okay, so the hope is to give us a kind of a basis, a model for a practice in our own lives, because this is something that we all have needed in our lives and will continue to need at some point. This is one of the most important aspects of living life in this world, is the ability to ask for forgiveness and to give forgiveness. And so I hope we can gain a few things from Srimad Bhagavatam as in terms of practical models, but also I hope to hear from you throughout the course of the seminar in terms of your own experience in engaging in both of these sides, right? Asking for forgiveness and giving forgiveness both. Just as kind of a general comment to mention that very often we do talk about the need for forgiveness, that we need to ask the Lord for forgiveness with a sincere heart for what we have done. But people often don't realize that it's just as difficult to give forgiveness. We forget that often we're in a position of forgiving another person, and that can be just as much of a challenge as well. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Krishna in particular, and this specific verse from Bhagavad Gita is very powerful. As Prabhupada is saying, it gives a prescription to us for how we should behave in terms of giving forgiveness or in forgiving a devotee. And we'll talk about that extensively tomorrow. But I think the first thing to note is that this verse gives us a window into Krishna's own heart, into Krishna's own character. How he sees a person's faults. Prabhupada is making a really powerful point here, a very interesting one actually also, that we all as devotees, if we're seriously practicing, we live split lives. We have our conditioned life and we have our transcendental life. And the conditioned life is the life that we have to live based on our social obligations, our family obligations, our political roles, our job, all these things that we have that engage us in really daily sorts of worldly affairs. And then we've got our spiritual side, our transcendental side, where we're really engaged in Krishna's service. And I'm sure you've experienced that this can really be kind of a split personality, bipolar sort of situation, where when we're in front of the deities, or we're at the temple and we're serving, or we're participating in kirtan. I'm sure many of you went to Sadhu Sangha last weekend. And when you're in a situation like that, where you're in the midst of hundreds of devotees, thousands of devotees, and many very, very advanced souls, we can very much be on the transcendental platform. We can, feel like we're not operating on the material level. And that's genuine. It's not fake, right? We have moments of great elevation and advancement. You've probably heard of the 9 steps of this bhakti, adav, shraddha, tata sadhu sangha, bhajana kriya, anartha nivritti, an advancement. And in our Krishna consciousness, even if we may be at the level of still fighting with our anarthas, our bad qualities, and our challenges. There is no doubt that occasionally we can experience real ruchi, real taste. There may be a flicker of real attachment for Krishna, asakti, or even bhava that shows up for just a moment, or maybe even for an hour, or for a whole weekend. We can get a taste of what's to come, but we can't maintain it. It's not stable. We slip back down. We slip back to whatever our stable level is, and then we have to work our way. So it's like a bell curve. The 9 steps of bhakti is mostly here in the level of anartha nivritti, or we're in the level of bhajana kriya or something. But occasionally we can, on this end, we can feel something more for Krishna, and that's real. Right? That's real. It's not fake. It's just not stable because of the anarthas. So there's that transcendental side, and there's that worldly side. And Prabhupada is saying that devotees in general always like to live a wholesome life. He's saying wholesome in the sense that you are one whole. That whatever you do in your outside life is the same as what's happening in your inside life. Right? The exterior, the internal, the material, the spiritual are all connected together. So we're very humble at the temple, but we're also humble in our families and in our work and so on and so forth. We're very tolerant when we're dealing with Krishna, but we're also tolerant in our daily. That's the hope. That's the ideal. But while we're still in that conditioned state, Prabhupada says here occasionally the two can diverge. We have this determination to serve Krishna, but in our conditioned life we may behave less than perfectly. Sometimes in a seriously problematic way. Durachara, we may do something terrible. In that situation, Krishna is telling us that that devotee should not be considered, should not be criticized, should not be regarded in a bad way, should not be thought of badly, but rather should be still thought of as a sadhu, as a saint, sadhu eva, only as a sadhu, mantavya. The word mantavya in Sanskrit is a prescriptive word. It says he should be thought of like this, not he may be or he could be a sadhu, he should be. So it's an order to us that we should think of that person as a sadhu. And Krishna is promising himself that he will think of us, of the devotees, in that way as well. This is why. Why is Krishna willing to forgive such a significant transgression against by a devotee, against social rules or propriety or behavior or spiritual standards? Why is he willing to forgive it? Well, primarily because that devotee's determination is still correctly situated. So, what does this mean? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary, he says, when a devotee feels sincere remorse for what he or she has done, thinking along the lines of, oh, look at what I have done. Because of me, Krishna is ashamed. Because of me, the devotee community's reputation is ruined. In this way, a devotee feels sincere regret for what they have done. The fire of that remorse burns up the reaction of the misbehavior. It eats it up. And Prabhupada makes the same point in the story of Parikshit Maharaj and his offending sage Shamik Rishi, and vice versa, the son of Shamik Rishi offending Parikshit Maharaj. That it's the fire of repentance, the fire of remorse, which burns up the quality, the bad quality which gave birth to that misbehavior. And Prabhupada here is emphasizing that it must be an accidental fall down. Now, how do we know that the fall down is accidental? How do we know that it's not an intentional fall down, that it's actually an accident? Srila Prabhupada, he clarified this in the story of Jay and Vijay. These are all stories we will get into this weekend. But he says specifically that the way we know a fall down is accidental is that as soon as the devotee becomes aware of the mistake, they immediately seek forgiveness. Right? They immediately attempt to make amends for what has happened. In other words, they feel a great sense of remorse and act upon that remorse to seek forgiveness. When that happens right away, then we know that the fall down was accidental. And in that case, Krishna is saying, even if they do something terrible, sudurachara, then they should be regarded as a sadhu. Now, the question that arises, the next question is, well, what if it's not a one-off thing? What if the devotee is repeatedly prone to committing the same mistake? What if they're doing it again and again? Then what? See, if it's a one-time thing, then Krishna says in the next verse, he says, Kshipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat chantim nigachati kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. He's saying, don't worry, if it's a one-time fall down, the fire of repentance within the heart of a devotee is such that Kshipram bhavati dharmatma, he will immediately, quickly become a dharmatma. He will become righteous again. He will become pious again. Kshipram, it won't take him long. But what if it does take long? Right? I mean, that's if you read the next verse, that's the immediate question that comes to mind is, okay, Krishna is saying if he does something terrible, feels bad about it, immediately repents, that person becomes pious right away. They elevate. But we all know of instances, perhaps ourselves, we know of ourselves as instances of situations where it's not immediate. It's not kshipra. It takes a while. And we do it again and again and again. Then what? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that this question is arising in the mind of Arjuna as Krishna is saying these words, Kshipram bhavati dharma, that this person will quickly become righteous. Arjuna is thinking, well, what if not? What if he doesn't? And therefore, Krishna becomes a little bit angry. And he says the second half of the next verse. He says, Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. He says, Arjuna, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. And this, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, is specifically for that instance. That if a devotee again and again commits the same mistake, even then Krishna says, he will not perish. I will still protect that devotee. That devotee may need to suffer some reaction for that repeated sinful activity. We may need to learn some lesson as a result. But that devotee's future success is still assured. Why? Or under what condition? So long as the devotee thinks in the following way. I may have to suffer in hell for my misdeeds, or I may become an animal in my next life. I know I'm doing something terrible, but whatever happens, Krishna, I'm still determined to serve you. I want to somehow continue in your service. Please keep me engaged in your service, despite my repeated weakness, despite my repeated fault. If that mood is there, again, a mood of repentance, not a mood of, well, I didn't do anything wrong, or no, actually, this is fine, or, justifying it, but if a real sense of acknowledging, this is the standard that Krishna wants from me, that Guru wants from me, but this is where I'm at, and I can't seem to make it. up here. I try and I fall, and I try and I fall. But I'm determined. I'm determined. I'm going to serve Krishna. That this is my determination in life. Right? Still, it's that samyak vyavasita, the intellect, the motivation is still samyak. It's still good. Then Krishna says, Name bhakta pranashyati. That devotee will never perish. It may take some time, and it may take some work, but the devotee is still under my protection. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says something really sweet there. He says that Krishna, he's telling Arjuna, he's expecting that in many assemblies of very cultured people, devotees' behavior and character is criticized. It so often happens that people come to the temple and they may think that they may look at devotees and be very critical. They may say, oh look, this person is a devotee, claims to be a devotee, see, wearing dhoti, kurta, tilak, and yet they still become so angry. And yet they still behave like this. What's the use of being a devotee? Krishna is estimating that people will criticize the devotee community in this way, the devotee's character. And therefore he's telling Arjuna, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, that, oh Arjuna, you should go into such assemblies of people, raise up your hands and declare it boldly, Pratijani, Name Bhakta Pranashyati. You may criticize, but Krishna will not give up on that devotee. He will protect that devotee. And you may have heard that the reason he's asking Arjuna to declare it boldly is because people may or may not believe Krishna in this regard. That Krishna thinks that in the process of protecting my devotees, doing exactly what he's promising, in that process I often have to break my promise. This is the only time Krishna breaks his promise, pretty much, is when he's trying to protect the devotee somehow. So he's telling Arjuna that you should go tell everyone. Because Arjuna's promise is pretty stable. Arjuna promised that he was going to kill Jayadratha by evening. You know the story? He wants to kill him by night. And he kept his promise. Right? Arjuna doesn't give up on his word. So you tell everyone. Because I may not be trusted in such assemblies, Krishna is thinking. It's a fact. Krishna uses the same word, pratijani, or pratijani, the same verb, promising. Elsewhere, where Krishna promises himself, what verse does he use that in? Very famous verse, where Krishna makes his own promise. You remember? The same word, pratijani. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Mam ivaishyasi satyam te pratijane prayosime. Same word. Konte pratijani. Pratijane, he says, I promise you, Mame Vaishyasi, you will come to me. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend, Priyam. So Krishna promises when he's promising to his devotees. He's promising to his devotee Arjuna here. I promise you, because the devotees will believe Krishna's promise. So Krishna directly promises that. I promise you that you will come back to me. But when he's talking about other people, then Krishna tells Arjuna, you go promise to them. Tell them of my promise. Because they don't trust me. You trust me, but they don't. So you find a way to convince them. So as a side note, this is a really nice message for a preacher, for someone who, a devotee, that it is our job as devotees of Krishna to make Krishna look good. To make Krishna sound reasonable. To make Krishna's words believable. That's our job. Krishna says so many things in Bhagavad Gita, And he says so many things in Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's our job to know what part of Krishna's words to speak when and to whom to help build their faith in Krishna. If you go to someone who has recently come to Bhagavad Gita, studied Bhagavad Gita, or come to the temple, and you right away begin speaking of the Kumbhipaka hells in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And if you don't give up this activity, you will be boiled in a pot of oil or thrown in a lake of stool. Then, okay, Krishna says this, no? I mean, Bhagavatam says it, so Krishna says it. But not very smart. Because we're not encouraging that person's faith in Krishna. Krishna is asking Arjuna that you get them to believe me. Kaunteya pratijani. You promise to them my promise. Why? Because they will believe you. So that's our role as a preacher. As not preachers even, just devotees of Krishna, as his servants. It's our role to make our master look good and to make sure that his words are believable to persons, that we help build their faith in Krishna. So it's a very nice, small point, but important one that emerges from this verse. Now, here's the key point I want to come to from this, which is to say, from this verse, we see something very important about Krishna's character. He is telling us in this verse 30 of chapter 9, that when someone's intention is good, Krishna is willing to forgive their action. When their intention, their motivation, or to use a stronger term, determination, is good, then Krishna is willing to forgive the action, the actual behavior. This is a big deal. Because we all know that they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Krishna is telling us the opposite here. He's saying the road back to Godhead is paved with good intentions. That actually, that's what he's going to focus on. Can anyone give me an example from Srimad Bhagavatam of a story where Krishna does just this, where he takes the intention of the devotee and forgives the misbehavior that happens? That's the opposite. That's the opposite. We'll come to that. We'll come to that. But where the devotee had good intentions, wanting to do something, trying to serve the Lord with the best of intent.
When he's trying to feed Krishna something nice, but he feeds him something, the peels of the bananas.
Yes. So there's the story of Vidur where he's, or sometimes it's said his wife, when she's feeding Krishna and in so much ecstasy that they peel the banana, and instead of giving Krishna the banana, give Krishna the peel. And we know that with Sudama as well, that the intention was to give Krishna something nice, but he ended up only having chipped rice that was uncooked and broken, not very edible, and yet Krishna accepted it. So those are good examples of Krishna accepting intention. We need something a little stronger though, because in that case they weren't really offenses. Krishna even didn't take it as a wrongdoing. Right? It would be difficult to categorize it as durachara, as doing something bad, because it was an act of love, right? It was a mistake. Any thoughts of someone who actually made a mistake, a previous, but their intention was good? The first example that comes to my mind is the story of Jai and Vijay. In Jai and Vijay's case, these were two gatekeepers who were guarding the Lord's 7th gate. There are 7 gates to enter Vaikuntha. And these are the ones who guard the final gate. So their job is the most important, it's the toughest. They're the final barrier between whoever wants to enter Vaikuntha and the Lord. And we know, maybe you've heard the story, that one time when the four Kumaras, the four boys, sages, came to see Lord Vishnu for the first time, they come to the gates and they pass the first 6 gates with no incident. The other 6 gates have their gatekeepers also, and somehow the gatekeepers didn't stop them there. Srila Vallabhacharya, he says that the 4 Kumaras were qualified to enter the first 6 gates, but they were not qualified to enter the 7th gate, which is why they were stopped. That the first 6 gates are referred to the Lord's 6 opulences, all powerful, all beautiful, all knowledgeable, all of those. And those, they had appreciation of those opulences of the Lord, that Aishwarya of the Lord. But the 7th gate requires bhakti, and they did not yet have bhakti. We know this from Bhagavatam's description. Anyway, that's a detail. So the 7th gate they come to, and Jai and Vijay stop the Kumaras. And they don't recognize who these boys are. They're children who seem to have lost their way. They're naked, no way to see the Lord of the world in a naked state, and they're unkempt. They're not very well groomed either. They look at these 4 boys and they stop. They actually become angry, and their eyes become red like copper, and they block the path with their maces. And they say, "Stop, how dare you try to enter Vaikuntha?" And when they're stopped, the sages become terribly angry themselves. And they curse the 4 boys, the Jai and Vijay. They curse the gatekeepers. And they tell them that you have a discriminatory mentality. You are exhibiting signs of fear, when in fact no one can come to Vaikuntha unless they're pure anyway. What are you afraid of? Why are you discriminating in a place that is free of duality? Therefore, because you have a mentality that is saddled by anger and envy and hatred and fear, you should go to that place where these things belong, namely this world. So we curse you to fall down to this world. The moment Jai and Vijay hear this curse, they recognize right away that they've made a grave mistake. And that this is actually someone these are people very advanced and qualified, and they've misrecognized them. And so they right away fall at their feet, give up their anger, fall at their feet, and beg for forgiveness. And the only thing they ask from the Lord, from the Kumaras, they say that whatever we deserve, we should get. We have wronged you, there is no doubt. But please arrange things in such a way that when we go down to this earth, we do not forget you. That's the only thing we ask. Let us not take birth as animals, because in that state we cannot remember Krishna. Otherwise, whatever we deserve, we should get. So they admit their mistake right away, they fall at their feet and beg for forgiveness. And this, Prabhupada says, is evidence that the fall down was accidental, that it was not intentional, that the intent was good. Their desire was only to serve the Lord, to do their service. It wasn't to do anything bad. And as soon as it became clear to them, their true intent came out, and they begged for forgiveness from the Kumaras. And therefore, sadhureva samantavya, they have to be considered to be sadhus. They cannot be criticized for their behavior. In fact, Bhagavatam says that the Lord, as soon as this curse was uttered, he became so upset that he ran immediately from the inner chambers where he lives in Vaikuntha out to the gate. Normally, the king does not come to the gate to receive visitors. They come in to see him. But the Lord runs out immediately because he knows that his devotees are in trouble. And he has promised, Name Bhakta Pranashyati, my devotee will never perish. And yet, they are here ready to perish, to be kicked out of the spiritual world. And the Lord runs to the front. In fact, Bhagavatam describes that the Lord came barefoot, no sandals on, no chappals. And the acharyas describe that the reason the Lord did not have those sandals is because he was thinking in his mind that these boys, the Kumaras, have come to see my lotus feet. This is why they're so excited. This is why they got so angry at being stopped, because they're so eager to see my feet. Therefore, let me come without shoes. They will see my feet quickly, and their anger will calm down. So the Lord came barefoot. And Bhagavatam describes that he had his hand on the shoulder of Garuda, which is a very odd stance. In fact, I don't know of any other story where Krishna has his hand on the shoulder of his carrier. Garuda is the eagle who carries the Lord. And the typical way the Lord comes is either sitting or standing on the back of Garuda. So again, the acharyas explain that the reason the Lord had his hand on his shoulder is because he could not wait. He was in such a rush to protect Jai and Vijay that he could not wait for Garuda to come there, for him to get on him, to board the flight, to get all the safety announcements, to take off. Right? None of that. He just ran. And Garuda was running behind him, trying to keep up with the Lord. And so to acknowledge his service, when he got there, Krishna put his hand on his shoulder and said, see, okay, no problem. I'll use you as an armrest. So the point that the acharyas want to make is that Krishna was so anxious. He was in so much anxiety to protect his devotee. Name bhakta pranashiti, my devotee can never perish. And in fact, he then tells the Kumaras, he tells them indirectly, directly he tells them, you are Brahmins, you are very worshipable, you are great sages, whatever you have spoken is right. He says, in fact, that these two gatekeepers have made an offense. They are my servants, and therefore the offense is mine. When a servant commits an offense, then the blame goes to the master. And he's responsible in the end, Krishna says. So Krishna accepts responsibility, and he says, no, I agree with your punishment. But indirectly, he makes it clear how worried he is about Jai and Vijay. And he tells them in two different ways, two different instances. First, he says that they have committed an offense. I'm very sorry. But please ensure that they come back quickly to Vaikuntha. They have to go, I understand. But please help them return quickly. This would be a great favor you are doing to me, he says. Krishna is so kind. He's saying, he's telling the Kumaras, look, you have come to see me, to worship me. Well, if you want to do me some service, take care of these two. Because it would be a big favor to me if I got them back soon. Secondly, he tells them that you are so respectable. I honor you so much, O four sages, that for you, I am willing even to cut off both of my arms if they are inimical to you. I would be willing to give up my limbs for you on the surface. But of course, who does he mean by his arms? These Jai and Vijay, these two gatekeepers. He's saying, look, this is what you've done to me. You have chopped off my own arms. These are as dear to me as my own limbs. They protect Vaikuntha, they protect me, they're my guardians. And the Kumaras feel terrible about this. And they then beg forgiveness for what they have done. And that we have cursed innocent people. The point I want to make is that this is an example of what Krishna is describing in this verse. That if the intention is good, but the action is a mistake, it's wrong, Krishna will forgive. He regards them still as a sadhu, and he will still protect under every circumstance. Another example is Bharat Maharaj. I won't go into the story for lack of time, but Bharat Maharaj, again, his intention was good. He wanted to serve Krishna, to go back to Godhead. He left home and everything, all his kingdom, ended up becoming attached to a deer. And that attachment was not the cause for his failure. Took a little extra time, but Krishna in the end protected him. So if our intention is good, Krishna accepts the intention, ignores the action. But here's what's so amazing about the Lord. That side of things is described in this verse. But the opposite is also true with Krishna. If the intention is bad, but the action is good, Krishna says, let's forget the intention and take the action. That's what's so amazing about Krishna. What's an example of that? What's a good example of that? Krishna taking down Ajamil, right? Ajamil was that the example you were going to give? So Ajamil was someone who intended, his intention was terrible. He left his wife for a prostitute, spent his whole life with her, had multiple kids. To raise the family, he resorted and to satisfy his prostitute wife, he ended up pillaging and stealing and robbing and swindling people and doing all kinds of violent crimes. And in the end, when he's dying, he calls out the name of his youngest son. He's not intending to call out Krishna's name. Narayan is his youngest son's name. And right away, Krishna says, oh, he called me? Of course Krishna knows that was not his intent. He's there in the heart as the super soul. He knows exactly what we're intending. We can't hide anything from him. Sarvasya chakra vidhi sannivishto, he says. Ishvara sarvabhutanam riddeshe. So he knows exactly what we're thinking. And yet he chooses consciously to ignore the intent. Why? Because the action is better. So let's help this person advance. Let's help this person come closer to me. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. The servants of Yamaraj, the Yamadutas, tell the Vishnudutas, you know, right, that he was not intending to call out the name of Vishnu? Like, isn't this an obvious case? And I don't think Krishna's view, Krishna's argument would hold up in any court of law. In any court of law. But for Krishna, it's enough. The Yamadutas go to Yamaraj and they say, what's going on? He says, they tell him that dharma is outlined in the Vedas, they say. And we know the Vedas. They tell us that when someone has committed sinful actions with bad intent, they should be punished. And Yamaraj's reply says, no. Dharma is not laid out in the Vedas, it is, secondarily. But he says, Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. Not the Vedas. Dharma is laid out by Bhagavan. The Lord lays it out and therefore He can choose when to not follow the rules. I'm sorry. The big boss has made an exception. We have to go along with it. Krishna accepted the action and completely ignored the malintent. What's another fine example of Krishna taking the action and ignoring the intention?
Putana.
Putana. Yes, you gave this example earlier. Of Putana. This is probably the best example, the finest example, the most radical, extreme example. It's really shocking, actually. That famous verse is there in Srimad Bhagavatam, one of Bhagavatam's most beautiful verses, I think. He says, Aho Bhakiyam Stanakala Putam. You know who's speaking this verse? It's Uddhava. Uddhav is, this is not in 10th canto in the the episode of Uddhav and the Gopis. It's much before. So Vidur has come to Uddhav to hear about Krishna Lila, Krishna Katha. And in the end, Uddhav will send Vidur to Maitreya Muni, which is most of the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. He'll send him to Maitreya because he says, I'm too young to instruct you. You're too much my senior. Also, he says that he's too much in a distressed state. Uddhav at this time is too distressed and too much in pain. What has just happened? Krishna has left this world. So Uddhav is in shambles. He's very pained and feeling full of separation. And he can barely talk of Krishna without breaking down. So he's like, look, I'm not in any conditioned state to tell you about Krishna right now. You go to Maitreya Muni, that will do you good and that will do him good also. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. So anyway, but before he goes, Vidur asks him something about Krishna. Uddhav, he's stunned for some time. His voice is choked and he can't say anything. He's so overcome with emotion, thinking of Krishna, his dear friend whom he's lost. And he says some verses about Krishna that are very meaningful because they're very heart-rending, they're very emotional. He's speaking not in a kind of systematic way. He does later on, before he sends Vidur away, he gives him a little overview of Krishna's life. Actually, this is something useful to know for devotees, that if you want a summary of Krishna's life, 10th canto is very long, right? What, 99 chapters? 95? Something like that. It's huge, 10th canto of Bhagavatam. But if you want a summary of Krishna's life from Bhagavatam, then you can find it in the 3rd canto, Vidura's description of Krishna's life to, Uddhav's description of Krishna's life to Vidura. Beautiful. But before he can actually compose himself, when he's still overcome with emotion, he says a few verses about Krishna that are very deep and very powerful and very heartrending. And one of them is this verse, Aho Bhakiyam Stanakalukutam. He says, how wonderful, how amazing is my Lord Sri Krishna, that when the witch, meaning Putana, came to him, Bhaki, Jighamsaya, with a desire to kill him. How? By smearing poison upon her breast, to give Krishna her breast milk when he was just a baby, and thinking he will drink my milk and drink the poison and die. Then Krishna, we know, he drank her milk and her life air, killed Putana. But in return for that act of traitorous, murderous act, he gave her the position of mother within the spiritual world. Why? Because in this instant, Krishna accepted the action and forgot the intention. He thought, after all, she's coming like a mother, and I drank from her breast. What she was meaning to do, who cares? She came as a mother, I will give her the post of mother. So Uddhav remembers all the demons Krishna has killed, he liberates. He remembers that. But this instance is, frankly speaking, radical, even a bit crazy. That someone who comes in such a position of trust, Putana is given by the Acharyas as an example of the lecherous guru, of the traitorous guru, the cheating guru. Someone who comes to take our trust and then misuses that trust to mislead us. Who could be more of a trustworthy person in this world than a mother? And when she herself decides to kill her child, there's no greater treason in this world. There's no greater act of treason. And so the fact that Krishna forgets the intent, accepts the action, Uddhav says, how could anyone take shelter of anyone else in this world? And how could you take shelter of any other master in this world when you have someone like that? Uddhav is asking. That isn't it amazing that we look for shelter elsewhere in this world when we've got a master of that quality? And Srila Prabhupada, he says in the purport, a very beautiful line actually. He says, the Lord accepts the least qualification of the living entity and awards him the highest reward. That is the standard of his character. Right? The Lord accepts the least qualification of the living entity and awards him the highest reward. That is the standard of his character. So, when the intent is good but the action is poor, Krishna takes the intent, forgives the action. When the action is excellent but the intent is poor, Krishna forgets the intent and takes the action. What's the third possibility? What if they're both bad, right? The intent is bad and the action is bad. Then what? Even then, Krishna forgives so long as we ask for forgiveness. Even then. And what's an example of that? Lord Brahma. Huh? KKE? Good. Huh? Jagai and Madhai? Lord Indra. All excellent examples. I mean, if you look at Lord Indra's situation, here's someone who tried, his intent was to kill the Brajavasis. We talk about respecting the Brajavasis as Krishna's dearest servants and tolerating their offenses, if any, and aspiring to follow in their footsteps. I mean Brajavasis today. What to speak of Brajavasis in Krishna's time, right? Gopi, Bhartu, Padakamale, or Das, Dasanadas. Our whole process is Ramya, Kaj, Duvasana, Brajavadhu, Vargena, Ya, Kalpita, is to follow in the footsteps of the Brajavasis. This is our goal one day, right? Is to serve in the mood of the residents of Vrindavan. And here's someone who doesn't insult them, who doesn't ignore them, who doesn't, disrespect them. He actually tries to kill them. That's his intent. And his action, well, he follows through on it. Right? He does everything in his capacity to actually try that. And yet, after all of that, he comes to Krishna, hangs his head low, and says, Krishna, I'm such a fool. I'm so sorry at what I've done. And Krishna says, it's okay. It's okay. I just wanted to crush your pride, and now that you're humble, remember who's master, and go back, and go to heaven, and everything's good. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. In fact, Krishna was easier with Indra than he was with Brahma. Brahma, he stole the cowherd boys and the calves from Krishna, hid them away for a full year. And when he comes back to ask for forgiveness from Krishna, what does Krishna say? It's actually a trick question. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. He just says, no, and lets him go. Bhagavatam says, but he indicates by his gesture, no. After all of that, the reason is because Brahma was much more advanced than Indra was, and Krishna expected a lot more from Brahma. His very body, Brahma's body, is made of intelligence, is buddhi. His intelligence is, in one purport in Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada explains that the whole universe is his body. His intelligence, his body is made of buddhi. Like our body is made of earth and water. We're earthly beings. Some beings are fiery beings. Their predominant element is fire. So Brahma's is buddhi, is intelligence. His intelligence, his body of intelligence encompasses the whole universe. Therefore he knows what everything is going on in the universe. So such a great personality, so full of knowledge and wisdom. And he did something like this. So Krishna is not very impressed. With Indra, he's more forgiving. That okay, he holds Brahma to a little higher standard. But in the end, it's not clear who learns more from the process. Because Brahma's prayers are, frankly speaking, very, very deep. Brahma, after this incident, when he begs for forgiveness, he comes to Krishna and he says, "My dear Lord, I pray, my only prayer is that let me come back and take birth in this Vrindavan, in Brajabhumi, where I can serve the very people who I offended. Because I see now that their bhakti for you is incomparable." It's like Uddhav, practically speaking. His mood, he's so taken by his experience of Braj, even though it was an offensive experience. He begs Krishna forgiveness and says, "Let me come back and take birth in Vrindavan as one of the trees or the creepers. It doesn't matter what, so long as I have the company of the people of Braj, of Vrindavan." So he makes some significant advancement in the process. Whereas Indra, not so clear, right? He repeats it again. What's the incident? Remember? The Parijata flower. Yes. The whole thing happens, and Krishna sends Indra to heaven, and basically Indra's response is like, "Okay, good, we're back in our position." Right? That's his main concern. He's not asking for residence in Braj and so on. He's very happy to be back in heaven. I'm the king of heaven. At least I didn't lose my spot. And once again, when Satyabhama asks for the Parijata flower, Indra is there again to fight Krishna. Have you not learned yet? And again he makes the mistake. Again Krishna forgives him. Right? So this is that point. Okay, you keep asking, I'll keep forgiving. His determination is okay. But both Brahma, Indra, and then Jagai and Madhai, right? Action was bad, intent was bad. But their only qualification, they asked for forgiveness. Even Lord Ramachandra told Ravana, or who was it that told him? Hanuman or Anga? Even at this point, just before the battle, he says, "If you ask for forgiveness from Krishna, from my Lord, he is so kind that he will forgive you even now." Even now, after everything you've put him through, and your stealing of Mother Sita, and all of that, even now, just before Ravan's death, you ask for forgiveness, he will forgive you. That is this, Prabhupada saying, this is the standard of his character. This is the standard of Krishna's character. There's no limit to his forgiveness. So the intent is bad, the action is good. Krishna forgives the intent, takes the action. The action is bad, the intent is good. Krishna forgives the. I said that. If the opposite way, the intent is bad, the action is good. Krishna forgives the intent, takes the action. If both the intent and the action is bad, Krishna forgives both if we ask for forgiveness. And if we don't ask for forgiveness, right, so that's in chapter already. Yes, that's true. I mean, yes, in the short term he may kill us, right? But he just waits. He just waits. He knows that will come around one day for asking for forgiveness. So he just waits. Right? Sarvasya chaham vidhi sandeshto matta smriti jnanam apohanam cha. It says Ishvara sarvabhutanam nirdeshe arjuna tishtati brahmayam sarvabhutani yantra aruna we're going through our wanderings in this world, ignoring Krishna, offending Krishna, rejecting Krishna. Krishna just waits. Va suparna sayuja sakaya. Two birds on a tree. One is eating the fruits of the tree, the Upanishads say, the other is just watching. Waiting. They're friends, but we've ignored him. Krishna just waits. Yeah.
Would Devotee Maharaj's stepmom be counted as someone who didn't ask for forgiveness even though she did too bad action and rejection?
Yeah, that's a really good point. What's your name?
Sonia.
Sonia. Yeah, so it's a perfect question, and it leads exactly to the next point. The question, or the question that you were making, that Soumya was making, was this. So Dhruva Maharaj's story, his stepmother, Suruchi. So Suruchi denied Dhruva a place on his father's lap. And that rejection made Dhruva so angry that he went to the forest and in 6 months had darshan of the Lord, and he came back. Everyone was regretful, his father particularly, for what had happened. But Suruchi, she did not ask for forgiveness. Suruchi's end was what? How did she end up dying?
In the forest fire?
Yes. So she ended up burning in a forest fire. It was not a planned thing. She wasn't killed. She ended up being caught in a forest fire and burning to her death. And the question is, well, in this case, she committed an offense, but look at the consequence. Well, where was the forgiveness? We've talked about 4 different cases so far, but there's a 5th and final case that we haven't discussed. All 4 of the cases have one thing in common. The devotee commits an offense to Krishna. The 5th case, and the final one, is where the offense is not to Krishna at all. Everything we have talked about so far has been related to a devotee's offense towards Krishna. But when a person commits an offense to Krishna's devotee, then a different set of rules apply. Then what can Krishna do to help at that point? If we commit an offense towards a devotee. In Suruchi's case, it was a big offense to Dhruva Maharaj. And Prabhupada, in the purport, he says something, in one of the purports for that story, he says something rather frightening. He says, Krishna takes it as Vaishnava aparad, offense to a Vaishnava, even if that person is not a Vaishnava yet. Oh! He says something along those lines. Dhruva Maharaj at that time was not a pure devotee. He was angry because he was rejected from his father's lap, but also because he was rejected from the throne. Being removed from the king's lap means that you are not the heir to the throne. That's the symbolic meaning. Therefore, when he goes to Brahma, when he goes to the forest, he's praying for what? For kingdom, right? So that connection is important. He's not just saying, oh, let my father love me again. He's asking for a kingdom that is greater than his father's. Means he's got some anger in regard to being divested from his rightful claim as heir to the throne. So he's not a pure devotee by any means. I mean, he's not even yet surrendered to Krishna. He's not even yet taken the shelter taken the step of Artho Jignasa Radharti, of going to Krishna. And yet, Krishna took that offense so seriously. Prabhupada says, Krishna takes it as Vaishnava aparad, even if a person is not yet a Vaishnava. I mean, that's scary. Yes? How many people have we offended in our conditioned life, as Prabhupada saying that side of our life, where they're not even devotees. When we make an offense to a devotee, we recognize it, we try to make some recompense or ask forgiveness. But in day-to-day life, and who knows who could be a devotee in the making? Or, a little closer to home, what about offenses towards new devotees, or just starting off devotees, or visitors to the temple, or congregations? There's so many ways in which we think, I'm superior, I have a right to speak like this, behave like this to such and such person. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. But when an offense happens towards a devotee of the Lord, then what can Krishna do to help? This is not a trick question. There is actually something he can do to help.
Guide his intelligence so that he seeks shelter of the devotee that he has offended.
What he can do, the most he can do, the only thing he can do, is direct the person who's made the mistake, who's caused the offense, to seek shelter of, to seek forgiveness of the person who he or she has offended. And the finest example of that is Ambarish Maharaj in the back.
Sometimes when we commit offenses to devotees, sometimes when we ask forgiveness from Krishna himself, he forgives us. But what about the devotee? What if he doesn't, he or she doesn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes what if we committed, what's your name? Mayuri. So Mayuri is asking if we've committed an offense towards a devotee, Krishna may forgive us, but what if the devotee doesn't forgive us? So the point is that Krishna cannot forgive us in that instance. He makes very clear in the story of Ambarish and Durvasa. He says, I'm so sorry, he says to the sage, I'm so sorry, but I'm incapable of forgiving your offense. I cannot do anything to help you. He says, Sadhavo hridayam mahyam. The sadhus, the devotees, are my heart. And I'm their heart. I'm in their heart. Therefore, there's no difference. I see them as my own self. But when you commit some mistake towards them, they're dearer to me, he says, than my own self. When you commit an offense towards them, I can't. I can't. But the way in which Krishna forgives is by directing the devotee, directing the offender to that devotee, and says, you must go back and seek shelter of that devotee. Seek forgiveness from them, and then I can help you. Then once that devotee forgives, then you're good. So it's this fifth situation that is going to be the focus of our entire seminar. It's to essentially answer the question that Mayuri has asked. That's going to be one of the questions we discuss. Is how do we seek forgiveness? Not from Krishna, but from another devotee, from one another. What do we do if that forgiveness is not forthcoming? And if we happen to be in a situation where someone asks forgiveness of us, or even if someone doesn't ask forgiveness and commits offense towards us, or we feel offended, how do we forgive? But I wanted to begin by giving us a snapshot of Krishna's character here. Because this is our motivation to forgive and to seek forgiveness. Because Krishna models it for us. Right? This is the standard by which Krishna lives. And that's the standard he's asking us to rise to. And he's not saying, well, this is my standard, I'm God, I don't expect you to be there. No, he's saying right here, Sadhureva samantavya. Again, a prescriptive word. You must, you should consider that person a sadhu. I expect you to rise to the same level of forgiveness. So when we seek forgiveness from God, well, as Jesus said, right, forgive and you shall be forgiven. This is our motivation. That, okay, Krishna, this is the standard of character that Krishna shows us. And this is the standard of character he asks his devotees to live up to as well. How we do that, that's our seminar for Saturday and Sunday. Okay. So I'll pause here and see if anyone has any questions for the next few minutes. Any comments? Yes, please.
Yes, Prabhuji, I also was thinking that you glorified, you mentioned the glories of the Lord. And similarly, his devotees, his pure devotees are as glorious. And the example came to my mind was Narad Muni, where Manigriva and Dalako, where the intentions and the actions were good. He cursed them, but even when cursing, he was remembering how I could deliver. So he said the Lord will come in. So the pure devotees are as glorious that even they forgive.
Yes.
Otherwise, one is not a Vaishnava, one holds the grudge against, isn't it?
Yes. So Prabhu is making a very important point that it is a fact that this is the standard of Krishna's character, and he asks his devotees to rise to that standard, and his devotees do rise to that standard. And he's giving the example of Narad Muni and Nalkuvar and Manigriva, who were in malintent and bad action as well, and yet Narad Muni benefited them, even though it seemed like a curse. He gave them such great benefit, direct darshan of Krishna. We will discuss this in great detail, right, on Sunday when we talk about how it's the devotee's role to forgive. Right? So tomorrow is dedicated to seeking forgiveness, and Sunday is dedicated to giving forgiveness. And we'll see many nice examples. We see this particularly also in the case of Maharaj Parikshit, who is wronged in a most terrible way for a very, very small mistake. And yet his capacity to forgive is amazing. And it's very high standard, yes.
One more point that I read was once Tamak.
We have to correct the wrongdoing of another devotee, which may be taken as offense by that devotee. This is a very important and very subtle point. We find examples of this also in Srimad Bhagavatam. If I forget tomorrow or day after, then please remind me. It's on the plan to discuss that instance also, is in kind of a special case scenario of what to do when offense is caused because of a matter of duty. So we'll plumb these depths tomorrow. Yeah.
Something you said before, from a superficial hearing of that, it would seem that it's almost better to not advance too fast. You get mercy more easily. Indra versus Brahma. Could you comment on that? Because I know that's not true, but could you explore that and unpack that concept?
Yes. So the question is that it would seem from the case of Indra and Brahma that it's better to not advance too quickly, because Indra gets forgiven and Brahma is also forgiven, but Krishna is a little more stern with him. No. I mean, the thing is that Indra is let off easier, but in the long run his situation is worse. He's again offending Krishna, caught up again in his position as being Indra, king of heaven, will end up definitely being ensnared by Maya again. Whereas Brahma, despite getting a little heavier treatment from Krishna, ends up praying for Braja Bhakti, right? And becoming much purer in heart. He doesn't commit offense. You know, he advances much more as a result. Because his platform is higher, right? At the very least, he's coming to Krishna with some knowledge. Whereas Indra is not coming with that knowledge, right? His starting point is higher. His ending point is also higher as a result of this process. So, sometimes Krishna's mercy or Krishna's forgiveness can come in slightly strong ways. Especially the more we advance, Krishna's mercy can be a little more stern for what seem to be lighter offenses. Now the Acharyas explain that, Indra brought the Brajbasis together under Govardhan, whereas Brahma separated them. Therefore, Brahma's offense was greater. So that understanding is there from the Acharyas. But just from a surface level understanding, right? I mean, Brahma's intent was not as bad as Indra's. The net result was worse. Krishna got separated for a year. But his intent was not as bad, right? He very carefully, delicately lifted up the Brajbasis, put them in a cave, put them to sleep, then brought them back, make sure no one remembered anything. He did things as well as he could. And he knew, he had a hunch that Krishna is God, so he was careful in his tests. And he was trying to confirm a doubt he had, rather than Indra, who just, kind of forgot that this is Krishna. They totally lost it. So Brahma's intent was better in the whole process. And yet Krishna's was a little more stern with him. And that we see often happens when devotees, when we advance in Krishna consciousness, Krishna takes less more seriously. And the reason for that is because he is pushing us to advance further, right? He's pushing us to make significant advancement in the path. And so his mercy can come in slightly harder ways. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur elsewhere describes that sometimes Krishna's mercy can burn. It can be like eating really hot chutney. It burns the mouth as we put it in, and yet it's delicious for the devotee. So Krishna's and that, I mean, this is the difference between Vrindavan and Mayapur. Vrindavan Dham gives us mercy, and Mayapur gives us lots of mercy. Mayapur is more merciful than Vrindavan Dham. Gauranga Mahaprabhu is more merciful than Krishna. But sometimes Vrindavan can lead to faster advancement. Because Gauranga Mahaprabhu, he'll forgive and forget any offense. And it's like, okay, he's at least he comes for darshan once a day. Something. And he's really, Radharani is a little less forgiving in Vrindavan. Krishna is a little more strict in managing the affair. So he can slap us a little harder. Right? This is why we have so many monkeys in Vrindavan. Come back as monkeys, as hogs sometimes in Vrindavan. Right? So the mercy can be a little harsh, but it goes faster. And it goes faster. One more birth as a hog in Vrindavan, you go back to Godhead. So it's not too bad. It's burning as a punishment, but it's not too long. Right? So it depends what kind of mercy we're ready for. And in the case of Brahma, he took a little stronger dose of mercy, but he was ready for more. He said, I want to come back to Vrindavan. Whereas I think Indra, if Krishna gave him harder mercy, it's likely that it would break his back. It's likely that he would lose his ability to do his service and to keep his faith. Because you can only take so much, depending on your advancement. Queen Kunti could take on and on and on in terms of mercy. But Indra, I don't think so. It needs more gentle pressure. So,
Thank you.
Today's a day for kids' questions. Yes?
I just thought of another example. Kumbhakar, I don't know what to think of him because he was a devotee, I think, of Shiva, and he still did that act for his brother, Radhika.
Okay, say your question again. Kumbhakarna.
I don't know what to think of him because he was still a devotee, but he did his bad act because for his brother. So his intention was good, but his action was bad.
Yeah. Kumbhakarna was not so much a devotee. He was, his intention was good socially speaking, in terms of family. He wanted to support his brother. That's a nice thing to do. But not if the brother is a demon. Right? Then, if the brother is doing something terrible, then we have to we cannot support that person in their actions, right? Karna had the same problem. Basically, it's a nice motivation to support your friend, be loyal unto death. But if your friend is committing sinful activities, like disrobing Draupadi, then you have to speak up. You have to help your friend by stopping them, by doing. This is why he deserved the death that he did, because he got the reaction that he did, because his it was misdirected morality. Morality that was not, it was loyalty, it was support. Also in Kumbhakarna's case, that shouldn't have been there. I think at one point Kumbhakarna gives his brother a little bit of good advice. He tells Raman at some point, I don't think this is really smart what you're doing. So he does something. But the main thing to remember is in all these cases, Uddhav makes this point really nicely in 3rd canto Bhagavatam, that in all of these cases, in the killing of the demons, they all end up getting liberation. So in the short term, Kumbhakarna may have had to die, but because he died at the hands of Lord Ramachandra, therefore his liberation was guaranteed. Right? So Krishna is still forgiving in that case. At least this person came to me in some way. Are you the same girl who was sitting here? Someone had their hand up here. Oh, who had their hand up? Okay. Anyone else?
So in the case of Lord Indra, Lord Brahma, even Putana, right? These situations occur because Krishna also wants to enact his Leela.
Yes.
Right? So to what extent are these offenses inspired by Lord Krishna in the first place?
So yes. The question was these things with Putana and Lord Brahma and Indra, all of these things happen because Krishna has a desire to perform his leelas. So to what extent are these offenses actually inspired by Krishna? So it's a fact, right, that Krishna must get some blame for a lot of these offenses, and therefore in that context his forgiveness is a little less amazing, because he forgives something that he himself inspired. So I think you caught Krishna on that point. But here's the thing. Krishna's desire to make something happen still does not preclude the person's intent. Right? Krishna manages these things really well, where he puts together something that might be there in the heart or mind of the devotee, and something that is there in his own heart, and he puts them together and does something wonderful with it. So in some cases we hear, the Prabhupada tells us very clearly that actually there was no reason for this offense to happen. Krishna wanted it. And yet, the devotee still did it, and yet it was still counted as an offense. So it's both ways. This is why everything that Krishna does is multi-layered in meaning. If you see it from Krishna's perspective, it's all his plan. And isn't that true even with our own lives? Yes? I mean, they say, right, no, not even a blade of grass moves without Krishna's will. So on some level, everything, even our own lives, is orchestrated by Krishna. So if you see things from Krishna's perspective, sure. Ultimately, he's the only one to blame for any kind of offense. And he says as much in the Jai and Vijay episode. He says it explicitly. He says, this was actually all ordained by me. Therefore, he accepts responsibility. All this happened by mine. The Kumaras aren't bad, the Jai Vijay aren't bad, this was all my plan. And in the case of Maharaj Parikshit, Srila Prabhupada explains again and again in the purports that the fact that such an advanced devotee would lose his temper at such a small thing, we'll tell the story tomorrow, but such a small thing as, he didn't get a proper reception, he was thirsty, is just not to be expected from a king who tolerated the Brahmastra's heat within his mother's womb. He couldn't tolerate a little bit of thirst. Right? It's frankly a little unusual, Prabhupada says. It's unusual, these are his words. And similarly, for someone to curse because you found a dead snake by the king on your neck is, or your father's neck, is frankly a little overreacting. So Prabhupada says, all of this was orchestrated by the hand of the Lord so that Srimad Bhagavatam would be spoken. Otherwise, what is the possibility of a pure devotee like Parikshit Maharaj becoming overcome by that so much anger? And he says, just so the person who cursed would not be blamed, could be forgiven, because ultimately the Lord did it, right? He didn't want the person who cursed Shringi to suffer so much. He made the curse come from the mouth of a boy, a little child. Because then how can you blame the child? Kids say stuff and you have to forgive, right? Parents don't take it seriously. No one does. So, in this way, no one was blamed. And yet, if you look at it from the perspective of the devotee, then yes, Bhagavatam teaches us many important lessons from the ground level. Right? So if you look at it from the 30,000 feet level, or the Vaikuntha perspective, then yes, everything is being run by Krishna's desire. But if you look at it from the earthly perspective, which is what we need to do in this circumstance, then we learn many important things from Parikshit Maharaj's response and Shringi's anger and all of those things. So Krishna works on multiple levels. Ultimately, he's to blame for everything in this world. And yet, he's not to blame. He says, Namam karmani limpanti, name karma phale spriya. He tells Arjuna Bhagavad Gita, Namam karmani limpanti. All this karma you're doing, not my responsibility. And you're fighting, you're responsible for what's happening. So we see that even when Krishna is responsible, still the devotee accepts some reaction for whatever the action might be. So maybe we should conclude here. It's 9:15. Thank you all so much for your attention. I hope we'll see you again tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.